Hi everyone, welcome to the SailPoint IdentityIQ training session provided by Meta Horizon Inc. I'm your instructor Rabindra. So in today's session, before we deep dive into writing rules and understanding different relationship between the SailPoint IdentityIQ object, we must first have to know about the identity objects that are present in SailPoint and how to capitalize the SailPoint APIs during the time of customizing workflows and writing rules. So we can utilize rules in different paths of SailPoint. So the purpose of writing rules or having rules written is to implement custom business logic into different parts of SailPoint. So rules are utilized in workflows as well, since workflows can reference rules. So rules can also be used for the validation of different form fields. They can also be utilized in certifications. They can be utilized while onboarding applications. So whenever we try to onboard some applications, so there are different categories of rules that are present, some connector rules, aggregation rules. So these rules actually manipulate the data that is incoming from the target application. So if you want to manipulate or manage or want to customize any kind of fields into the SailPoint, then in that case we can utilize rules. So before we do that, we have to first understand the IdentityIQ object model. So there are different kinds of objects that are present in SailPoint, and there are some interrelationship that exists between such set of objects in IdentityIQ. So before I describe about the IdentityIQ object model, so for all the SailPoint developers, SailPoint Compass is a forum that is very important. So for all the developers for whom Stack Overflow has high priority or has high importance, so is the case for SailPoint developers with SailPoint Compass. So SailPoint Compass is a forum, or it's a mecca, or you can even call it a hub. So what actually happens in that central place or forum is that SailPoint developers can find the technical white papers, and they can utilize the IdentityIQ's based practice documents that is related to BeanShell coding, deployment, IdentityIQ zip version files, solutions to common errors. And so a SailPoint developer can communicate with other code developers, peers, SailPoint employees for their queries, questions, or any kind of post. So therefore, in order to create a SailPoint Compass community account, any SailPoint developer may require a company credentials or the domain email in order to create a community account. So before I describe about the object models, let me quickly describe what BeanShell is. So BeanShell is a scripting language. So by scripting language, we mean that these scripts are generally written to control other applications, or let's say they are designed for integrating and communicating with other programming languages. So creating BeanShell script is much like creating a Java classes or methods for IdentityIQ. So basically the BeanShell script, it directly manipulates with IdentityIQ's runtime object in memory. Therefore, it is important to have an introduction and working understanding of different IdentityIQ object model inside IdentityIQ before we move into writing or customizing those objects. So in nutshell, BeanShell is just like a Java-like scripting language that runs in Java runtime environment. So most of the objects, so there are different objects that you can find in IdentityIQ. So most of these objects are found in the package SailPoint.object. So some of the notable objects that we mostly deal in SailPoint are identity, application link, bundle form, quick link, provisioning plan, IdentityRequest, certification object, and so on. So basically IdentityIQ have a classes for reading data from external system through a process called aggregation. So whenever the data is read into the product, it is transformed to match an object model that IdentityIQ uses its HOOD, that is resource object. So whenever we perform aggregation, SailPoint's connector creates resource object, and that resource object is the raw representation of account or employee records in the target application. So one thing we have to understand is that any type of object we encounter in IdentityIQ has a corresponding class. So for instance, let's say if we have identity as an object, then the class that is related to this object is called SailPoint.object.identity. So SailPoint.object.identity is the class that is packaged in the package name SailPoint.object, and similarly each object is also associated with a table in IdentityIQ's backend database, and that table name is called spt_identity for the identity object. So if the object we are dealing is application, then that application is packaged under the class SailPoint.object.application, and it has a database table name in the IdentityIQ backend database as spt_application. So there are different objects that we are going to describe now. So we have application, identity, and link. So these are the objects that we have to deal during the time of aggregation, and they have some interrelationship. We will also describe about certification group, certification entity, and certification item relationship. Then the other important objects and their interrelationship belong to provisioning plan, account request, and attribute request. And ultimately we will also describe about the workflow, identity request, approval set, and approval item objects and their interrelationship. So basically an application represents the external software that from where IdentityIQ feeds data, and identity represents the digital representation of a real person, or let's say an account or record that is present in a target application, and usually these identities are created whenever we perform account aggregation. So link basically represents, or it is the reciprocal representation of account or employee record in an external application. Let's say if a user or an employee has its account as account A in application A, then the corresponding link will be created in IdentityIQ in the name of link A, and link A holds all the information that is contained in an account A. Therefore, what we can understand is that link objects cannot exist without application object, and link object always has a reference to identity object. In case the link object do not have a reference to an identity, then there are certain tags by the use of which we can remove such accounts. And the other important thing is the resource object. So basically whenever we perform aggregation, connector reads the information of employees or accounts and then creates a resource object for the input to different kind of rules. So in the pictorial view you can find external application, you can find IdentityIQ, and in the middle you can see a connector object. So whenever we run an aggregation, connector reaches to the external application, and then it reads the feed file or account group, and from there the connector creates a resource object, and that resource object will be as an input to SailPoint IdentityIQ. So similarly, in the coming classes we'll describe about certification. So certification is actually a collection of access reviews or item. So this access reviews or item means the respective owner will check if any user has the right access or not. So generally these access reviews or items are stored in SailPoint as certification item object, and these certification item object are associated with certification entity. So certification entity are actually the object which are being certified. So in SailPoint we certify identities, we certify entitlements, we certify role membership, we certify role composition. So these are all the certification entity. So whenever an admin or the certification owner creates a certification, all those informations are encapsulated into a certification definition object. So certification definition object houses the options selected by the administrator to create or configure the certification. So once the certification is created and it's launched, a certification group object is created, and that certification group object holds all the individual accesses that are assigned to separate reviewer staff. So how you can consider consider this thing is that certification group object is the outer shell, and in certification group object there are some certification object. Inside certification object we will find certification entity, and the certification entity will house certification item object as the innermost object. And all the tasks that is related to accesses will be dealt with provisioning plan. So whenever I have submitted any kind of request, that request will be represented as a provisioning plan, and this provisioning plan are passed through IdentityIQ's connector to the application system, or it can also be a ticketing system, or it can be a manual work item for fulfillment. So actually a provisioning plan is a set of one or more account requests in order to make changes in an account related to an external application or system. Therefore, an account request is a provisioning request, which can be to change the state of an account on an external system, creation, or any kind of core operation that we perform on an account. So account request can contain multiple changes to be applied at once, and these changes are modeled as attribute requests. So attribute request simply represents a request to set an account's attribute, which can be setting the last name to a new value or adding two groups of an Active Directory's account member of field. So an account request usually contains several attribute requests to apply the same time. So we can view the relationship as follows. So first we'll have a provisioning plan object. A provisioning plan object can contain account request plus operation related to different applications. So each account request can house multiple attribute requests plus operations. So attribute requests are usually done to set the attribute related to an account. So it can be an update, set, or reset. So similarly, we'll also talk about the workflow IdentityRequest, operable set, and operable item. So generally workflows are similar to algorithms. So in algorithm, there are different steps, right? And each step perform certain actions. So in the similar manner, workflow in IdentityIQ represents a programmatic sequence of steps that are used to process access request, or it can also be to send notifications, to show a form to the approvers, and to even process approvals for access request, fulfill provisioning request, and several other functions in the system. Identity models the request into an identity request object. A workflow takes the identity request, then it can construct the operable set as well as the operables to send to the approving parties. So the approving parties are sent notifications, which can be defined as a step of the associated workflow. Therefore, an operable set contains one or more operable items that approvers can approve or reject. So in order to proceed with these identity requests, either we can utilize custom provisioning or some out-of-the-box LCM workflows. So there are different kind of out-of-the-box LCM workflows and sub processes, such as LCM create and update LCM, provisioning LCM, password management, LCM registration. We also have manage ticket. We also have identity request sub workflows. So the result of workflows are always tracked through tags result object. So these are the four important links that a SailPoint developer requires in order to access the Javadocs, the IIQ console, as well as the debug page. So we can find all the SailPoint IdentityIQ object, interfaces, classes, packages, method related to an object in the link http localhost port /IdentityIQ/doc/Javadocs. So this is the URL. Similarly, we can also even track the Javadoc inside webinf doc/Javadoc. And the other tools that SailPoint developers usually require is the IIQ console. So IIQ console can be used to run different kinds of aggregation tasks. You can even test a workflow. You can run aggregation tasks as well. You can encrypt and decrypt by the use of IIQ console. You can even generate schemas through IIQ console command. And besides that, a SailPoint developer also have to interact with different objects XML, which can be accessed through the debug page. So the other uses of debug page can be defined for login configurations, call timings, to get informations about the products information. I hope that you have now got the understanding of IdentityIQ object model, what are the interrelationship between different kind of objects, and how you can utilize the IdentityIQ concept as well as Javadocs and debug page in order to create rules which can be utilized in different paths of SailPoint. So I hope to meet you in the next session where I will describe you about the integration of non-authoritative application. So for now we are trying to integrate a JDBC application. So once we perform the integration of non-authoritative application, there is a core concept that is related to correlation. So we'll describe about correlation, and there are different ways we can correlate identities or accounts in SailPoint. So there are 3 different ways we can perform correlation. One is by using manual correlation, the other one is using correlation rule, and the last one is by the use of correlation configuration. And these 3 Nexus has a priority set. So SailPoint usually execute the correlation rules first with the precedence, followed by the correlation configuration, and ultimately manual correlation can be done. So I hope to meet you in the next session. Until then, I say you a goodbye and have a good day. Thank you.